Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the stained glass windows of St. Pares, Mary's chapel, casting rainbow prayers onto the white marble floor where Elena stood like a vision from heaven itself. Her grandmother's wedding dress, hand-stitched with infinite love and dreams 60 years ago, embraced her curves like whispered promises of forever. The ivory silk had aged gracefully to the color of warm candlelight, and against Elena's luminous dark skin, it glowed with an otherworldly radiance. White roses, hundreds of them, cascaded from every wooden pew like fallen stars, creating a celestial pathway to her future. Each bloom represented sacrifice. Double shifts at O'Brien's diner, scrubbing floors until her knees bled, saving every precious penny for months. Javier had once cupped her face in his strong hands and whispered, "White roses, my love. They remind me of your smile, pure and absolutely breathtaking. When we marry, I want you surrounded by beauty." "It'll be here," Elena whispered to her reflection in the chapel's antique mirror, her trembling fingers tracing the delicate pearl necklace that had been her grandmother's final earthly gift. The pearls felt warm against her throat, as if Grandmama's spirit was embracing her on this most sacred day. Our love conquers everything. Javier always keeps his promises to me. But time, that merciless master, moved forward with cruel indifference. The ornate chapel clock chimed twice, its bronze voice echoing through the sanctuary like a funeral bell. 2 o'clock became 2:15, then 2:30. The pianist, Mrs. Lynn, played Ave Maria for the third time, her usually steady voice beginning to waver with uncertainty and mounting tension. Elena's mother, Marisol, sat in the front pew, wearing her finest church dress, the navy blue one she'd owned for 15 years, but kept immaculate for special occasions. Her weathered hands, scarred from years of seamstress work, clutched a tissue as she kept glancing toward the chapel doors with growing worry, etched in every line of her beautiful face. Valeria, Elena's 19-year-old sister, paced the small bride's preparation room like a caged lioness, her protective instincts blazing in her dark eyes. "Maybe there's an accident," she offered, but her voice lacked conviction. "You know how crazy traffic gets downtown during lunch." The whispers from the congregation grew louder, more pointed, more venomous. Elena caught cruel fragments floating through the air. Poor child. What did she expect? I knew this would happen, marrying above her station. That Alvarez boy was just playing with her. Each word was a dagger thrust deep into her heart. But Elena lifted her chin, with the fierce dignity her grandmother had instilled in her soul. She was Elena, daughter of a seamstress who had worked her fingers bloody to provide. Granddaughter of a woman who had picked cotton under the scorching sun to build a better life for her family. She was strong. She was worthy. She would survive whatever came. But when Father Antonio appeared at the preparation room door, his kind eyes swimming with pity and sorrow, Elena's knees nearly buckled beneath the weight of impending devastation. "My dear child," he said gently, his voice heavy with compassion, "perhaps we should consider—" "No." The word erupted from her lips like a battle cry, fierce and defiant. "He's coming. Javier Alvarez looked into my eyes just 2 nights ago and promised me forever. He told me I was his heart, his soul, his everything. He keeps his promises." The priest's silence spoke volumes, echoing through the small room like thunder. Behind him, Elena could see the congregation shifting restlessly, some already gathering their purses and preparing to leave this spectacle of abandonment. It was then that young Mateo Garcia, the altar boy with kind eyes and gentle hands, appeared, clutching a white envelope that seemed to burn like fire in his small palms. His face was pale with the weight of the message he carried. "Miss Elena," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "A man in a black Mercedes left this for you. He said to make sure you got it right away." Elena's hands shook violently as she accepted the envelope, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird desperate for freedom. The paper felt expensive between her fingers, cream-colored stationery that smelled faintly of Javier's cologne, that intoxicating mixture of sandalwood and cedar that had haunted her dreams since their first kiss. With trembling fingers, she tore open the envelope, her breath catching in her throat as she recognized Javier's familiar handwriting, the same elegant script that had penned love letters filled with promises of forever, poetry about her beauty. dreams of their future children playing in sunlit gardens. But these words were different. These words were daggers wrapped in silk. My beloved Elena, the light of my soul and keeper of my heart. Forgive me for what I am about to do. I am not strong enough to be the man you deserve, not brave enough to protect you from the darkness that loving me would bring into your perfect world. You are too beautiful, too pure, too good for someone like me. Please forget me. Find a better man who can love you the way you deserve to be loved. You will always be my greatest love, but I am not worthy of yours. Forever yours in secret, Javier. The letter fluttered to the floor like a broken wing, the elegant words blurring through her tears as Elena's legs gave way beneath her. Her mother caught her as soul-deep sobs tore from her throat, raw, primal sounds of a heart shattering beyond any hope of repair. "Get these people out of here," Marisol commanded, her voice fierce with maternal protection and blazing fury. "Right now, this is not a show for your entertainment." As the church slowly emptied, leaving behind only wilted white roses and the ghost of dreams that would never be, Elena felt the first piece of her heart transform into stone. She clung to her mother's strong embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and determination that had always meant safety. She didn't know that in 2 weeks, morning sickness would reveal the most beautiful and cruel irony. She carried Javier's children within her womb, twin sons who would inherit his emerald eyes and her unbreakable spirit, who would become both her salvation and her daily reminder of the love that had destroyed her. In that moment, surrounded by the ruins of her fairy tale, she only knew that love had betrayed her with surgical precision. The white roses that had symbolized hope now mocked her with their wilted beauty, their petals scattered like broken promises across the marble floor. She gathered the fragments of her dignity, stepped out of her grandmother's dress with reverent care, and made herself a solemn vow. Never again would she allow her heart to be a playground for someone else's cowardice. Love had shown its true face beautiful, intoxicating, and ultimately destructive. As she walked out of Mary's chapel in her simple cotton dress, carrying her grandmother's gown like a burial shroud, Elena left behind more than a failed wedding. She left behind the girl who believed in forever, emerging as a woman who would learn to find strength in her scars and beauty in her survival. The roses continued to wilt, but she would learn to bloom again differently, carefully, but with a fierce determination that would carry her through the darkest nights ahead. Chapter 2. Thorns of Survival. 10 years later, Elena's alarm clock screamed at 4 o'clock a.m. with the same merciless persistence that had jolted her from restless sleep every morning for a decade. The shrill sound cut through the pre-dawn darkness of her tiny apartment above Celeste's flower shop, where the scent of yesterday's bread mingled with the sweet perfume of roses seeping through the floorboards, a bittersweet reminder of dreams that had withered like forgotten petals. She rolled from the pull-out couch that served as her bed, her back aching from springs that had surrendered years ago to the weight of exhaustion and endless nights. The apartment was smaller than most people's closets, but it was theirs, and she had transformed it into a sanctuary of love through sheer determination and endless creativity. In the corner, beneath a window that faced east toward the sunrise, Diego and Lucas slept peacefully in twin beds she had discovered at a garage sale and painted sky blue, the only luxury she had allowed herself in 10 years of relentless survival. At 10 years old, her boys were her universe, her reason for breathing, her proof that miracles could bloom in the darkest soil. Diego, born first by 3 precious minutes, had inherited something ethereal from his father, those same emerald eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe, and an artistic soul that transformed cardboard scraps into masterpieces. His small hands created beauty from nothing, sketching on napkins, old newspapers, anything he could find, because proper art supplies lived in a realm of dreams far beyond their reach. Lucas, her fierce little protector, had captured her stubborn determination and wrapped it in his father's gentle heart. He watched over Diego with the intensity of a guardian angel, made her laugh when exhaustion threatened to drown her spirit, and possessed an old soul that sometimes frightened her with its wisdom. "Good morning, my beautiful princes," she whispered, pressing gentle kisses to their foreheads before beginning her daily choreography of survival, a carefully rehearsed dance that left no room for error. The schedule was unforgiving. 4:30 a.m. at Dawn Bakery, shaping loaves until her fingers bled. 10 o'clock a.m. at Celeste's flower shop, arranging bouquets for other people's celebrations while trying not to remember her own white roses. 9:00 p.s. M. Cleaning downtown offices while the city slept, invisible to a world that would judge her by daylight. Celeste Moreau, the elderly French woman who owned the flower shop, had become a surrogate grandmother to her boys, often slipping them treats and letting them help arrange flowers. Between jobs, Elena would walk the boys to school, watching other mothers drive away in cars while she counted bus fare, then return home to help with homework at their wobbling kitchen table that somehow held their dreams steady. "Mama," Diego said one evening as she carefully bandaged a deep cut on her hand from a broken bottle at work. His small face creased with worry beyond his years. "When I become famous for my art, I'm going to buy you a castle with 1,000,000 rooms and servants to take care of you. And I'm going to be a doctor and fix all your hurts forever," Lucas added, his earnest voice carrying the weight of promises he fully intended to keep. "We'll take care of you the way you take care of us." Elena's heart swelled and shattered simultaneously, love and pride battling with the crushing knowledge of what her sacrifices had cost her children. "My precious loves, you are already my castle and my healing. You are everything I need in this world." But late at night, when the boys finally slept and bone-deep exhaustion pressed down like a physical weight, she would trace the single photograph hidden in her makeshift jewelry box, a small tin that had once held her grandmother's buttons. The picture showed Javier laughing at something she had said, his eyes bright with mischief and endless love, captured in a moment when their world had seemed infinite with possibility. She kept the photograph not from lingering affection, but as evidence that she had once been loved completely, desperately, beautifully. It served as proof that before survival had hardened her heart into armor, she had been someone's everything. The boys had begun asking increasingly difficult questions with the persistence of children who deserve truth. Why don't we have a daddy like Nico and Sophia? What did our father look like? Did he love us before we were born? Will he ever come find us? Each innocent question was a needle piercing her carefully constructed defenses, but she always answered with measured honesty. Your father was a good man with a kind heart who couldn't stay with us. You have his beautiful eyes and his gentle spirit. Most importantly, you have me. And I love you enough for 2 parents, 3 parents, 100 parents. She never told them about the nights she cried into her pillow, grieving not just for lost love, but for the father they would never know. She never mentioned how she sometimes caught glimpses of Javier's expressions flickering across their faces, or how Diego unconsciously tilted his head the same way when concentrating, or how Lucas's laugh carried echoes of a voice that had once whispered promises of forever. She never spoke of the drawings Diego created, sketches of a tall man with dark hair who looked suspiciously like someone who lived only in her memories, as if his artistic soul somehow remembered a father he had never met. The hardest moments came during school events, when other children brought both parents, or when her boys watched father-son activities with longing they thought she couldn't see. She would hold them tighter those nights, whispering stories of their strength and worth until they believed in themselves the way she believed in them. Survival had become her greatest artwork, and love the dangerous, consuming kind that had once made her believe in fairy tales remained a luxury she could never afford again. She had learned to find beauty in small victories. Diego's proud smile when he showed her a new drawing, Lucas's protective hand holding hers when they walked past groups of older boys, the moments when her children laughed together and filled their small space with joy. Some nights, when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush her spirit, she would stand at their bedroom door and watch them sleep. These 2 perfect souls who had saved her from drowning in bitterness. They were her purpose, her strength, her proof that love could create miracles even when it destroyed the heart that gave it life. Tomorrow would bring another day of the same struggles, but she would face it with the fierce determination of a woman who had learned that survival itself could be a form of victory, and that sometimes the greatest love stories were written not in passion, but in sacrifice. Chapter 3. When Angels Cry. Javier Alvarez stood at his mother's graveside in the misty dawn of Riverside Cemetery, his charcoal Armani suit a stark contrast to the simple granite headstones surrounding him like silent witnesses to grief. At 33, he possessed everything the world claimed mattered. A multi-million-dollar architectural firm that designed skyscrapers reaching toward heaven, a penthouse overlooking the city where he had built his empire, and enough wealth to purchase anything his heart desired, except forgiveness for the most devastating mistake of his existence. 10 years had crawled by since he had driven away from St. Mary's chapel, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned bone white, his heart disintegrating with every mile that separated him from the woman he loved more than his own breath, more than his own soul. The letter he had left was a coward's escape, but revealing the truth would have destroyed Elena completely, and he had chosen her survival over his own happiness. His father, Eduardo Alvarez, had delivered his ultimatum with surgical precision. Marry that poverty-stricken girl, and I will systematically destroy every person she holds dear. Her mother will lose her seamstress position and never work in this city again. Her sister will lose her scholarship to nursing school. I will ensure that every door in this town closes to their family forever. You think you love her? Prove it. Walk away, and let her find someone worthy of her station. So Javier had chosen sacrifice over selfishness, believing that truly loving Elena meant protecting her from the venomous hatred that surrounded his family's wealth and power. He had fled to Chicago, built his architectural empire from the ashes of heartbreak, carrying her memory like a sacred wound that never healed, never knowing that his noble protection had cost her everything he had tried to save. I'm sorry, Mama, he whispered to the freshly turned earth where Sofia Alvarez rested beneath a blanket of white lilies. I'm sorry I let his poison turn me into someone you never raised me to be. I'm sorry I broke the heart of the only woman I could ever love. Sofia Alvarez had died 6 months ago, believing her son was a heartless playboy who had abandoned true love for ambition and wealth. The devastating truth was that Javier had never touched another woman since leaving Elena. How could he when her caress still burned in his memory like a sacred brand? How could he kiss another mouth when hers had tasted like salvation? As he walked through the cemetery's winding paths, planning to visit the small graves of the 3 babies Elena had lost to miscarriages during their courtship, children he had mourned in secret for a decade, tiny souls he would never hold, he heard something that stopped his heart completely. Laughter, clear, musical, and achingly familiar. He followed the sound around a towering marble monument dedicated to fallen soldiers and saw her, Elena, kneeling beside a small grave, arranging fresh white daisies with the same tender reverence he remembered, her movements graceful, despite the obvious fatigue in her shoulders. But this was not the radiant girl he had abandoned. This was a woman sculpted by suffering, her beauty refined by struggle into something that stole his breath and shattered his composure. Her dark hair was shorter now, framing a face that had learned both profound sorrow and incredible strength. She wore a simple yellow sundress that had clearly seen better days. But on her, it looked like poetry written in sunlight. And beside her, playing among the headstones with innocent joy, were 2 boys who made his knees buckle with recognition, twin boys, 10 years old, with vivid green eyes that mirrored his own, and Elena's luminous smile carved into their beautiful faces sons. The realization hit him like lightning, striking his soul. These were his children, flesh of his flesh, blood of his blood, playing in the cemetery, while their mother tended to graves he now realized must belong to their siblings, the babies who had not survived to take their first breath. Diego, the smaller of the 2, sat cross-legged on the grass, sketching something in a worn notebook with intense concentration, his tongue peeking out slightly as he drew, exactly the way Javier did when designing complex architectural plans. Lucas stood protectively nearby, watching the cemetery entrance with alert eyes, his small frame radiating the same fierce protectiveness that Javier recognized from his own childhood. Diego, stay close to Mama, Lucas called softly, his voice carrying authority that seemed impossible from someone so young. I'm drawing the angel on Mrs. Thompson's grave, Diego replied, his artistic focus absolute. She has the prettiest wings I've ever seen. Elena's voice, when she spoke, was honey and heartbreak combined. Finish your drawing, baby. We need to get home soon so you can help me with dinner. Javier pressed himself behind the monument, his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched this glimpse of the life he had never known existed. These boys, his boys, were perfect, beautiful, healthy, alive. The weight of 10 lost years crashed over him like a tsunami. He had missed their first steps, their first words, their first days of school. He had never held them as babies, never kissed their scraped knees, never read them bedtime stories or taught them to throw a baseball. Elena stood slowly, her movements careful and tired, in a way that spoke of long hours and physical labor. Even from a distance he could see the changes hardship had carved into her body. Hands that looked rough from work, clothes that were clean but worn, shoes that had been resoled multiple times. "What have I done?" he whispered into the morning air, his voice breaking with the weight of realization. "Dear God, what have I done to them?" As if sensing his presence, Lucas suddenly turned in his direction, those familiar green eyes scanning the area with unsettling intensity. For a heart-stopping moment, father and son stared at each other across the cemetery, two souls connected by blood and separated by a decade of silence. "Come on, boys," Elena called, gathering her purse and the small garden tools she had used to tend the graves. "Celeste is expecting us at the shop, and you know how she worries when we're late." "Coming, Mama," both boys replied in unison. Diego carefully closing his notebook while Lucas took one last protective look around the cemetery. Javier watched them leave, his family walking away from him, just as he had walked away from them 10 years ago. Elena's hand rested on Lucas's shoulder, while Diego skipped beside them, chattering about his drawing. They moved together with the easy intimacy of people who had learned to depend only on each other, a complete unit that had no need for the man who had created half of their DNA. When they disappeared beyond the cemetery gates, Javier collapsed onto a nearby bench, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He had built an empire, accumulated wealth and fame, achieved everything his father had deemed important. And for what? So that the woman he loved could struggle in poverty while raising his children alone. So that his sons could grow up believing their father had abandoned them. The white daisies Elena had left seemed to mock him with their simple beauty, so different from the elaborate white roses he had once promised to drown her in. These flowers spoke of survival, of making beauty from whatever resources were available. Of love that endured despite abandonment. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel everything for the next month," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything. I'm staying in town indefinitely." "But sir, the Thompson Project, I don't care about the Thompson Project. I don't care about any of it." He ended the call and stared at the graves where his children had played, where Elena had mourned babies he would never meet. For 10 years, he had told himself that leaving was an act of love. Now he understood it was the act of a coward who had chosen the easy path of his father's approval over the difficult road of fighting for what mattered most. His sons were growing up without him. The woman he loved was struggling alone. And somewhere in this city, they were building a life that had no place for the man who should have been their protector, their provider, their foundation. But he was here now. And somehow, some way, he would find the courage he had lacked 10 years ago. He would find a way to earn forgiveness for the unforgivable, to prove that love could triumph over even the deepest betrayal, even if it took the rest of his life. Chapter 4. The Language of Scars. The fluorescent streetlight cast an ethereal glow over Celeste's flower shop as Elena locked the front door at precisely 11:47 p.m. Her tired fingers fumbling with keys that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. The boys were safely asleep upstairs. Lucas's protective arm draped over Diego, even in slumber, and she had finally finished arranging the funeral wreaths for tomorrow's service at St. Augustine's work that Celeste had graciously allowed her to complete after hours for extra money. Her hands bore fresh scratches from the rose thorns, thin lines of blood that had dried into delicate crimson maps across her dark skin. She had learned to embrace these small wounds as badges of survival, proof that she was still fighting, still providing, still breathing despite the weight of 10 years carrying the world on her shoulders. The night air carried the scent of jasmine from Mrs. Lynn's garden next door. Mixing with the lingering fragrance of the flowers, she had spent hours arranging into symbols of grief and remembrance. She pulled her thin cardigan tighter around her shoulders, counting the bus fare in her pocket and calculating how many more hours she would need to work to afford Diego's art supplies for the school competition. That's when she saw him. Javier Alvarez stepped out of the shadows like a ghost, materializing from her deepest nightmares and most secret dreams. 10 years had transformed him from the young man she had loved into something magnificent and terrible. A figure carved from success and sorrow, wearing wealth-like armor that couldn't protect him from the devastation in his emerald eyes. His hair was darker now, touched with silver at the temples that spoke of sleepless nights and burdens carried in silence. He wore a black wool coat that probably cost more than she earned in 6 months. But beneath the expensive facade, she could see the same haunted expression that had lived in her dreams and nightmares for a decade. "Hello, Elena," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered, roughened by years of commanding boardrooms and building empires, but still carrying the same gentle cadence that had once whispered promises of forever against her skin. The sound of her name on his lips hit her like a physical blow, awakening nerve endings she had thought died long ago. "You have no right to be here," she said. The words emerging from her throat like broken glass, each syllable weighted with a decade of pain. Her hands trembled as she clutched her keys, the metal cutting into her palms with blessed distraction from the chaos exploding in her chest. "I know," he said, stepping closer, and she could smell his cologne, different from the one she remembered, more sophisticated, more expensive, but underneath it all was still the warm scent of his skin that had haunted her for 10 years. "I know I have no right to breathe the same air as you, let alone stand in your presence after what I did." "Then leave," she said. But even as she spoke the words, her treacherous body remained frozen in place, drinking in the sight of him like a woman dying of thirst. "Get in your expensive car and drive back to whatever perfect life you built on the ruins of mine." "I saw them today," he said, his voice cracking with emotion that no amount of wealth or success could disguise. "At the cemetery, I saw Diego and Lucas." The mention of her son's names from his lips made her blood turn to fire. She whirled to face him fully, fury blazing in her dark eyes like a goddess of vengeance. "Don't you dare speak their names. Don't you dare. They're mine, aren't they?" he asked, the question hanging between them like a blade suspended over both their hearts. "They have my eyes, Elena. They have nothing of yours," she shouted, the words exploding from her like gunshots, echoing off the empty street. "You gave up any claim to them the moment you left me standing at that altar. They are mine. I carried them. I birthed them. I raised them. I bled for them. You are nothing to them." But even as she spoke, she could see the truth flickering across his features, recognition, wonder, and a grief so profound it made her chest ache with unwanted sympathy. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, raw with pain. "Why didn't you come find me?" I would have what?" She laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any humor, bitter as winter wind. "Married me out of duty? Pretended to love me because I trapped you with pregnancy? I may have been young and naive, Javier Alvarez, but I was never pathetic." "It wasn't like that," he said, reaching toward her, and she stepped back as if his touch would burn her alive. "Elena, you don't understand. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. Not for a single moment. Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I had to." "You had to what?" She interrupted. "Break my heart? Humiliate me in front of everyone I knew? Abandon me when I needed you most?" She held up her hands, showing him the scars that crisscrossed her palms and fingers, marks from years of manual labor, from scrubbing floors until her skin cracked, from working with roses whose thorns drew blood daily. "Do you see these? These are what loving you cost me. Every scar tells the story of a night I worked while our children slept alone, wondering why their father didn't want them." Javier's face crumpled as he stared at her hands, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. "My God, Elena, what have you been through? What did I do to you?" "You taught me that love is a luxury I can't afford," she said, pulling her cardigan tighter, using it as both physical and emotional armor. "You taught me that fairy tales are lies we tell ourselves to make the darkness bearable." "No," he said, stepping closer, and this time she didn't retreat, held in place by the desperate intensity in his voice. "That's not what I wanted. That's not why I—" He stopped, running his hands through his hair in a gesture she remembered from their youth. "My father threatened you, your family. He said if I married you, he would destroy everyone you loved." "What?" she asked, the words hitting her like a slap. "It had photographs, Elena. Pictures of your mother leaving work, your sister walking to school. He knew where they lived, where they worked, where they were vulnerable. He said he would make sure your mother never worked again, that Valeria would lose her scholarship. He would have done it, Elena. You know he would have done it." She stared at him, her mind reeling as pieces of a puzzle she had never understood began clicking into place. "So you chose to destroy me instead," she said. "I chose to save you the only way I knew how," he said, his voice breaking completely. "I thought if I disappeared, you would be free to find someone better. Someone who could love you, without bringing down hellfire on everyone you cared about. You thought wrong, she said, the words coming out flat, emotionless, more devastating than any scream. You thought wrong about everything. They stood in silence for a moment. The weight of 10 years of misunderstanding settling between them like fallen snow. I wrote you letters, he said suddenly, his voice desperate. Every day for 10 years. I wrote you letters. I never sent them, but I wrote them, telling you about my day, asking about yours, apologizing for what I'd done, begging for forgiveness I knew I didn't deserve. I kept a diary, she whispered, the admission torn from her lips before she could stop it. Every night I wrote to you, told you about the boys, about their first steps, their first words. I told you how much they needed their father, how much I... She stopped, the confession dying on her lips. How much you what? He asked, stepping closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, the same eyes that looked back at her every day from her sons' faces. How much I hated you for making me love someone who could disappear like smoke, she said, the words barely audible, but they hit him with the force of a physical blow. I never disappeared, Elena, he said, his hand moving slowly, carefully, until his fingers barely brushed hers. I've been here the whole time, in the letters I couldn't send, in the love I couldn't kill, in the dreams where you forgave me for being too weak to fight for you when it mattered. The touch of his skin against hers was electric, awakening every nerve, ending she had thought was dead. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be touched with love instead of necessity. To be seen as a woman instead of just a mother struggling to survive. You can't just come back, she whispered. But her voice lacked conviction. You can't just explain away 10 years with a story about your father's threats. I'm not trying to explain it away, he said, moving closer, his other hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. I'm trying to earn the right to spend the rest of my life making up for it. Before she could protest, before her rational mind could stop her treacherous heart, she found herself leaning into his touch. 10 years of loneliness, of carrying the weight of the world alone, of pretending that she didn't dream about exactly this moment, all came crashing down at once. And then his lips were on hers, and the world disappeared. The kiss was desperate, hungry, filled with 10 years of longing and regret and love that had never died despite every attempt to kill it. She could taste his tiercer, maybe they were her own. Her hands fisted in his expensive coat, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed at her to push him away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, she pressed her forehead against his chest and whispered the words that terrified her more than poverty, more than loneliness, more than any struggle she had faced. I never stopped loving you either. Chapter 5. The Children's Hearts. Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed through the small windows of Elena's apartment, painting golden rectangles across the worn wooden floor, where Diego sat cross-legged, sketching in his notebook with focused intensity. Lucas practiced reading aloud from a library book about soccer, his voice careful and deliberate as he pronounced each word. The domestic tranquility shattered when 3 gentle knocks echoed from the door, a sound that made Elena's heart race with recognition. She had agreed to this meeting against every protective instinct screaming in her chest. After their devastating encounter outside the flower shop 3 days ago, after that kiss that had awakened feelings she thought were buried forever, Javier had asked for just one chance to meet his sons, not as their father, not yet, but as a man who wanted to understand the miracle of their existence. Boys, she called softly, smoothing her hands over her simple blue dress, the nicest one she owned, though she couldn't explain why she had chosen it this morning. Someone is coming to visit us today, someone very special. Diego looked up from his drawing, his emerald eyes bright with curiosity. Is it Miss Celeste? She said she might bring us those chocolate pastries from the French bakery. No, baby, Elena said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. It's someone I knew a long time ago, before you were born. Lucas closed his book and stood, his protective instincts immediately alert. At 10 years old, he had already learned to be suspicious of anyone who might disrupt their carefully constructed world. Is he going to try to take you away from us? He asked, the innocence of the question breaking her heart. No, sweetheart, she said. No one could ever take me away from you. You and Diego are my whole world. She opened the door, And there stood Javier Alvarez, but not the wealthy businessman from 3 nights ago. This was a man who had clearly spent hours choosing his outfit, settling on dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that made him look approachable, almost ordinary. In his hands, he carried 2 gift bags that he clutched like lifelines. "Hello," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion as his eyes immediately found the boys behind her. "Hello," Diego replied with characteristic openness, tilting his head with the same gesture Javier made when concentrating. "Are you Mama's friend?" The word friend seemed to hit Javier like a physical blow, but he managed a gentle smile. I suppose I am. My name is Javier." "That's a pretty name," Diego said, making Javier's smile deepen with genuine warmth. "I'm Diego, and this is my brother, Lucas. He's very protective." Lucas stepped slightly in front of his twin, his young face serious as he studied this stranger with unsettling intensity. "Why are you here, Javier?" Elena warned gently, but Javier held up a hand. "It's all right." He should ask questions. Javier knelt down to the boy's eye level, a gesture that immediately made the formal distance between them feel smaller. "I'm here because your mother is very important to me. And anyone important to her is important to me too." "How do you know our mama?" Lucas's question was direct, lacking the diplomacy of adult conversation. Javier's eyes met Elena's across the small room, a moment of silent communication that spoke of shared history and complicated truths. "We knew each other when we were younger, before you were born," he said. Diego, ever the artist, was studying Javier's face with the intensity he usually reserved for his drawings. "You have green eyes like us," he observed with innocent wonder. The observation hung in the air like a revelation waiting to be discovered. Javier's breath caught as he truly looked at his sons for the first time, not stealing glimpses from cemetery shadows, but seeing them clearly in the light of their home. Diego had inherited more than just eye color. He had Javier's artistic hands, long-fingered and graceful, already showing promise of the creativity that ran in the Alvarez bloodline. His face was a perfect blend of both parents, Elena's warm smile and Javier's contemplative expression. Lucas, though identical to his twin, carried himself differently. His shoulders were already set with responsibility beyond his years, his stance protective and alert in a way that reminded Javier painfully of his own childhood, spent shielding his mother from his father's cruelty. "Yes," Javier said softly, "we do have the same eyes." "That's funny," Diego laughed, settling back down with his notebook. "Most people don't have green eyes. Mama says we got them from our daddy, but we've never met him." The innocent words were like arrows to Javier's heart. He looked at Elena, who had gone pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as she watched this delicate dance between past and present. "I brought you both something," Javier said, offering the gift bags with hands that trembled slightly. "I hope you like them." Diego immediately abandoned his drawing, his curiosity overcoming any shyness, but Lucas remained cautious. "Why did you bring us presents? We don't even know you." "Because—" Javier paused, choosing his words carefully. "I wanted to make you smile. And because I think we have more in common than you might expect." Diego opened his bag first, gasping with delight as he pulled out a professional art set. Colored pencils, charcoal sticks, high-quality paper, and brushes that looked like they belonged in a real artist's studio. "Mama, look, real art supplies." Elena pressed her hand to her mouth, tears threatening to spill. She knew how much those supplies cost, knew they represented months of her salary, knew that Diego had been dreaming of such tools for years. "This is for me?" Diego whispered, his voice filled with awe as he reverently touched each item. "Every artist needs proper tools," Javier said, his own voice rough with emotion. "I have a feeling you're going to create beautiful things." Lucas opened his bag more slowly, revealing a soccer ball, not just any soccer ball, but an official FIFA World Cup ball, the kind professional players used in international competitions. Beside it was a book about famous soccer players and their training techniques. "I noticed you reading about soccer," Javier explained, "and I thought maybe you'd like to practice with a real ball." For the first time since Javier had arrived, Lucas's suspicious facade cracked, revealing the 10-year-old boy beneath the protective exterior. "This is a real professional ball," he breathed, holding it like it was made of gold. "Maybe we could kick it around sometime." Javier suggested carefully. If you'd like. Could we go to the park? Diego asked, already sketching something in his new art pad. There's a big field where Lucas could practice, and I could draw the trees. Elena found herself nodding before she could think through the implications. The park would be nice. An hour later, they walked together through Riverside Park, Elena pushing down the surreal feeling of seeing Javier with her sons, watching him point out different types of trees to Diego, while Lucas dribbled his new soccer ball with obvious joy. Look, Diego called out suddenly, running ahead to a bench where an elderly man was feeding pigeons. Can I draw the birds? Stay where I can see you, Elena called back, then turned to find Javier watching Lucas practice headers with his new ball. He's got good form, Javier observed quietly. Natural athletic ability. He practices with a tennis ball we found in the park, Elena admitted. He's wanted to join the school team, but the equipment fees. Consider it done, Javier said immediately, then caught himself. I mean, if you'll let me. I know I have no right to just… You're their father, she said, the words escaping her lips like a confession, simple and devastating. They don't know it yet, but you're their father. They watched in comfortable silence as Lucas attempted increasingly difficult tricks, his face bright with concentration and joy. Diego had settled on the grass nearby, sketching rapidly as he captured his brother's movements on paper. They're perfect, Javier whispered, his voice breaking. Elena, they're absolutely perfect. They ask about you, she said suddenly, needing him to understand the weight of his absence. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Father's Day. They ask if you're thinking about them somewhere, if you're proud of them, if you love them even though you can't be here. Javier closed his eyes, pain washing over his features like a tide. What do you tell them? I tell them that wherever you are, you love them more than words can express. I tell them that sometimes love means being apart, even when it breaks everyone's heart. She paused, watching Diego add delicate shading to his drawing. I never told them you abandoned us. I couldn't bear to break their hearts that way. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you for protecting them from the truth about what kind of man their father really is. You're not a bad man, Javier, she said, the admission surprising them both. You were young and scared, and you made a terrible choice. But you're not bad. Lucas jogged over to them, his face flushed with exercise and happiness. Mama, watch this. He performed an impressive bicycle kick that sent the ball spinning through the air. That was amazing, Javier exclaimed, and Lucas's face lit up with pride at the genuine praise. My coach at school says I have potential, Lucas said, then paused. But I can't afford the advanced training program. What if I told you, Javier said carefully, that there might be a way to make that happen? Lucas's eyes widened, but before he could respond, Diego came running over with his sketchbook clutched to his chest. I drew you, he announced to Javier, opening the book to reveal a remarkably detailed portrait. You were watching Lucas, and you looked happy. So I drew you being happy. Javier stared at the drawing, at his own face rendered with startling accuracy by the hands of his 10-year-old son who had never known him. In the sketch, he looked peaceful, content, surrounded by the warmth of family. It's beautiful, he whispered, and meant it. You captured something I didn't even know was there. Can I keep it? Javier asked, and Diego beamed with pride. Yes, I'll sign it like a real artist. As they walked home in the golden light of late afternoon, Elena watched Javier listen intently to Diego's chatter about art and Lucas's detailed explanation of soccer strategy. She saw her sons beginning to open their hearts to this man who shared their eyes and their blood, and she felt her own carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for second chances after all. Chapter 6. Dancing in the Rain. The autumn storm arrived without warning, transforming the quiet Tuesday evening into a symphony of thunder and lightning that made the old windows of Elena's apartment tremble. She stood at her small kitchen sink, washing dishes from their simple dinner of pasta and sauce, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears from heaven. Diego and Lucas sat at the wobbly kitchen table, working on homework by the warm glow of the single overhead lamp, the only luxury of electricity she allowed herself during the expensive evening hours. Their textbooks were worn from years of use by other students, but their young faces were bright with concentration as they helped each other with math problems. their whispered discussions, creating a gentle backdrop to the evening's rhythm. "Mama, look at this problem," Diego called softly, his pencil hovering over a particularly challenging fraction. "Lucas says you divide, but I think you multiply first." "Let me see, baby," Elena said, drying her hands on a threadbare towel. But before she could cross to them, the gentle knock came through the storm. 3 soft raps that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Her pulse quickened as it always did when she knew Javier was near. The past 2 weeks had been a careful dance of getting to know each other again. Park visits where he taught the boys to throw perfect spirals, afternoons at the library where he helped Diego research famous artists, quiet conversations on her tiny balcony after the children were asleep. Each moment had been building towards something, and tonight felt different, charged with possibility and the electricity of the storm itself. "I'll get it," Lucas called, jumping up from his chair with the eagerness that had replaced his initial suspicion of their mysterious visitor. "Wait," Elena said, her heart performing that familiar flutter. She checked her reflection in the kitchen window. Simple jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes. Nothing fancy, but clean and comfortable. She had stopped trying to impress Javier with appearances weeks ago. He seemed to find her beautiful whether she wore designer clothes or flower, dusted aprons. She opened the door to find Javier standing in the hallway, completely soaked from the rain, his expensive coat dripping onto the worn carpet. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and droplets of water clung to his eyelashes like liquid diamonds. Despite his obvious discomfort, his smile was radiant as he saw her face. "You're absolutely drenched," she said, stepping aside to let him enter, fighting the urge to reach up and brush the water from his cheek. "You should have waited until the storm passed." "I promised them I'd bring their art supplies tonight," he replied, his voice warm despite his obvious discomfort. In his arms, he carried several packages wrapped in brown paper, protecting them from the storm with his body. "I couldn't disappoint them." The simple statement hit her like lightning. The casual way he spoke of promises to her children, the natural assumption that their happiness mattered to him enough to brave a storm. 10 years ago, he had broken the most important promise of their lives. Now, he wouldn't break even the smallest commitment to 2 boys who still didn't know he was their father. "Javier," Diego exclaimed, abandoning his homework completely. "You're all wet. Did you swim here through the storm?" Lucas laughed at his brother's joke, but his practical nature immediately kicked in. "Mama, should we get him some towels and maybe some dry clothes?" "Of course," Elena said, grateful for something to do with her hands, for a reason to move and think and not stare at the way Javier's wet shirt clung to his chest. "Lucas, grab the good towels from the bathroom. Diego, clear a space on the couch for our guest." As she bustled around their small space, finding dry clothes that might fit Javier's tall, framey and old sweatshirt of her brother's that had been left behind years ago, along with a pair of sweatpants that would probably be too short, but would have to. Doche was acutely aware of his presence filling every corner of their tiny sanctuary. He had shed his wet coat and stood in their living room, examining Diego's latest drawings on the refrigerator, his face soft with genuine interest and pride. "This one is incredible, Diego," he said, pointing to a sketch of a soccer player mid-kick. "The way you captured the motion, the concentration on his face, you have real talent." Diego beamed with the kind of pride that came from being truly seen and appreciated. "I've been practicing drawing people in motion. Lucas helped by posing for me, but he kept moving and complaining that his leg hurt." "Art requires sacrifice," Javier said solemnly, winking at Lucas. "Even from the models." "Here," Elena said, offering him the towel and clothes, trying not to notice how their fingers brushed as he accepted the items, trying not to feel the familiar electricity that shot through her system like wildfire. "The bathroom is just down the hall." "Thank you," he said quietly, his green eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe properly. For a moment, they stood there in the small space between her kitchen and living room, the storm raging outside while something equally powerful built between them. While Javier changed, Elena tried to compose herself, focusing on brewing tea and pretending that having him in their space, wearing her family's clothes, didn't feel impossibly intimate. She could hear the boys chattering excitedly about the packages he'd brought, their voices bright with anticipation. "What do you think he brought us?" Diego whispered to Lucas. though his whisper was loud enough for Elena to hear clearly. "Probably something amazing," Lucas replied. "He always seems to know exactly what we need." The observation made Elena's throat tighten with emotion. In just a few weeks, Javier had become attuned to her children's needs and desires in a way that felt natural, intuitive, paternal. When Javier emerged from the bathroom wearing the borrowed clothes, Elena's breath caught. The sweatshirt was slightly too small for his frame, emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his torso. The sweatpants ended a few inches above his ankles, but somehow he made the mismatched outfit look effortlessly attractive. More than that, he looked like he belonged not like a wealthy businessman visiting the poor, but like a man coming home to his family. "Much better," he said, settling onto their couch with an ease that suggested he had always belonged there. "Now, are you two ready for your surprises? We've been ready for hours," Diego declared, bouncing slightly on his toes. "Patience, little artist." Javier laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that made Elena remember why she had fallen so completely in love with him all those years ago. "But first, I need to properly warm up. This storm is serious business." As if summoned by his words, thunder crashed overhead, and the lights flickered ominously. Diego immediately moved closer to Elena, while Lucas straightened his shoulders in preparation to be the protector if needed. "Just a storm, babies," Elena assured them. But she could see the worry in their eyes. Power outages meant no heat, no light, and often meant they would spend the night huddled together for warmth under every blanket they owned. Javier seemed to sense the family's tension, the way their bodies had unconsciously drawn together in preparation for hardship. "You know what my mother used to do during storms?" he said, his voice warm and conspiratorial. "What?" both boys asked in unison. "She would light candles and tell us that thunder was just the angels rearranging furniture in heaven, getting ready for a celestial party, and rain was them watering the flowers in God's garden, making sure there would be beauty waiting for us when the storm passed." "Really?" Diego asked, his artistic imagination immediately captured by the imagery. "Really. And then she would make hot chocolate, and we would dance to the thunder until the storm became our friend instead of something scary. She said that if you could find the music in the chaos, you could find peace anywhere." Elena watched him speak about his mother, seeing the genuine love and grief that flickered across his features. Sofia Alvarez had been a kind woman trapped in a marriage to a cruel man, and she had clearly passed her gentleness onto her son despite Eduardo's best efforts to poison it. As if he had orchestrated it perfectly, the power chose that moment to flicker and die completely, plunging them into darkness. Diego made a small sound of worry, but before Elena could reassure him, she heard the scratch of a match and saw Javier lighting the emergency candles she kept on the mantel. "Perfect timing," he said with a smile that was visible in the warm candlelight. "Now we can properly dance with the storm." The transformation was magical. Their humble apartment, lit by flickering candles, became something from a fairy tale. Shadows danced on the walls, and the golden light made everything look soft and romantic and perfect. Javier pulled out his phone and began playing soft music, something slow and sweet that mixed beautifully with the rhythm of rain against their windows. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, instrumental, and flowing like water. "This was my mother's favorite song," he said softly. "She used to dance to it in our kitchen while she cooked dinner, especially on nights when my father was working late." Then he stood and offered his hand to Diego. "May I have this dance, young man?" Diego giggled and accepted, allowing Javier to show him how to sway to the music, how to let the thunder be part of their rhythm. Javier was patient and gentle, guiding the boy's small feet with his own, teaching him the basic steps while making it feel like play rather than instruction. "See, you step like this and sway like that, and let the music tell your body what to do," Javier explained, his voice soft and encouraging. Diego caught on quickly, his natural grace evident as he found the rhythm. "It's like painting with your whole body," he said with wonder. "Exactly," Javier agreed. "Dancing is just another form of art." Soon Lucas joined them, initially shy, but drawn in by his brother's obvious joy. Javier taught him a different style of movement, something more energetic that suited Lucas's athletic nature. "Dancing can be strong, too," Javier told him. "Like soccer footwork, but with music." Elena watched from the kitchen doorway as Javier danced with her sons in their tiny living room, all three of them laughing as lightning illuminated their joyful faces. The sight was so perfect, so right, that it made her chest ache with longing and love and the impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be her life. "Mama," Diego called, spinning away from Javier with his arms outstretched. "Come dance with us. It's like we're in a movie." "Oh no," she protested, backing deeper into the kitchen. "I don't dance anymore. I've forgotten how." "Everyone dances," Javier said, moving toward her with the same gentle persistence she remembered from their youth. His eyes were soft in the candlelight, holding her gaze with tender insistence. "Your body remembers how, even if your heart has forgotten. I'm not the same person I was before," she said quietly, suddenly self-conscious about the weight she'd gained, the way her body had changed from childbirth and years of physical labor. "You're more beautiful now than you were then," he said simply. And the honesty in his voice made her eyes fill with tears. "You're stronger, more graceful, more real. You're a woman who has lived and loved and survived, and that makes you magnificent." Before she could protest further, his hands found her waist, pulling her into the circle of candlelight and music. The boys clapped and giggled as their mother was drawn into the impromptu dance party. "See," Javier whispered against her ear, his breath warm against her skin as they began to sway together. "Your body remembers everything." And God help her, it did. Her hands found their way to his shoulders without conscious thought, her body naturally following his lead as they moved together in the flickering light. She could feel the solid warmth of him through the thin sweatshirt, could smell the clean scent of rain and the subtle cologne that was purely him. The music changed to something slower, more intimate, and Diego and Lucas settled onto the couch to watch their mother and Javier move together like they had been choreographed by fate itself. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside their small apartment, peace reigned supreme. "You're so beautiful," Javier murmured, his voice barely audible over the music and rain. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. 10 years, and you're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." "Don't," she whispered, but she didn't pull away from his touch. "Don't say things like that." "Why not? It's true. Because it makes me remember things I've spent 10 years trying to forget." His forehead came to rest against hers, and she could feel his breath mixing with her own. "What if I don't want you to forget? What if I want you to remember how good we were together?" "We weren't good together," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "If we were good together, you wouldn't have left." "We were perfect together," he corrected, his voice rough with emotion. "That's exactly why I had to leave. I wasn't brave enough to fight for perfect." The song changed again, becoming something that seemed written specifically for this moment. Slow, romantic, filled with longing and hope, they continued to sway despite the danger of the moment, despite the way her resolution was crumbling with every breath. "Mama," Diego called sleepily from the couch, his voice drowsy and content. "This is nice, like a real family." The innocent words hit both adults like a physical blow. Elena tried to step away, but Javier's arms tightened around her, keeping her close. "It could be," he whispered urgently against her ear. "Elena, it could be real. We could be a real family." "It's too late," she said, but tears were streaming down her face, betraying the words. "Too much has happened. Too much time has passed. It's never too late for love," he said, his lips dangerously close to hers now, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me your heart doesn't race when I'm near." Instead of answering, she made the mistake of looking into his eyes, those emerald depths that had haunted her dreams and broken her heart and given her the most beautiful children in the world. The kiss was inevitable, desperate, 10 years of longing and regret and impossible love condensed into a single moment of surrender. She kissed him back with all the passion she had buried, all the love she had denied, all the hope she had refused to acknowledge. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, she could hear her son's soft snores from the couch and the gentle rhythm of rain that had become a lullaby instead of a threat. "Stay," she whispered against his lips, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Are you sure?" he asked. She looked at her children sleeping peacefully on the couch, at the candles that had transformed their humble space into something magical, at the man who had danced with her sons like he had been doing it their whole lives. Stay, she repeated, and this time it sounded like a prayer, like a promise, like the beginning of something beautiful and impossible and real. Javier carefully moved Diego and Lucas to their beds, tucking them in with the tenderness of a father who had been waiting 10 years to perform this simple act of love. Then he returned to Elena, who was blowing out candles and setting the world right again. "The storm's passing," she said softly, listening to the rain growing gentler against the windows. "Some storms leave everything more beautiful than they found it," he replied, pulling her close again. As they stood together in her small living room, holding each other while the last of the thunder rumbled in the distance, Elena felt something shift in her chest, a wall crumbling, a door opening, a heart remembering what it felt like to hope for forever. The storm had indeed passed, but it had left something precious in its wake. The beginning of a family learning to trust in love again. Chapter 7: Letters Never Sent. The morning after the storm brought crystalline sunlight that transformed Elena's tiny apartment into a cathedral of golden light and possibility. She woke to the sound of whispered conversations and quiet laughter from the kitchen, and for a blissful moment, she allowed herself to believe this was her life, waking up to the sounds of her family preparing breakfast together. But reality crashed over her as she remembered the night before the dancing, the kiss, the way she had whispered, "Stay," like a woman surrendering to inevitable heartbreak. She had fallen asleep on the couch in Javier's arms, while the boys slept curled together on the floor, and sometime during the night, someone had covered them all with blankets. "Mama's awake," Diego announced cheerfully as she appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face bright with the contentment that only children could achieve after a night of unexpected magic. Javier stood at her tiny stove, expertly flipping pancakes with the ease of someone who had spent years taking care of himself. He wore the same borrowed sweatshirt from the night before, his dark hair still slightly mussed from sleep, and the sight of him cooking in her kitchen made her heart perform dangerous acrobatics in her chest. "Good morning, beautiful," he said softly, his eyes finding hers across the small space with an intimacy that made her remember every stolen touch from the night before. "You didn't have to make breakfast," she protested, self-conscious in her simple pajama cotton shorts and an old t-shirt that had seen better days, but were clean and comfortable. "I wanted to," he replied, plating perfect golden pancakes that smelled like heaven. Besides, someone promised these boys pancakes if they helped clean up the living room. Lucas beamed with pride. "We put all the candles away and folded the blankets. Javier said teamwork makes everything easier." The casual way her son spoke their guest's name, the obvious comfort and trust in his voice, made Elena's throat tighten with emotion. In just a few weeks, Javier had become part of their morning routine, their evening conversations, their weekend adventures. After breakfast, Javier said, serving plates to the boys before meeting Elena's eyes with careful intention, "I was hoping we could talk. There are things I need to show you, things that might help you understand." The seriousness in his voice made her stomach flutter with anxiety, but she nodded. "Celeste doesn't need me at the shop until noon. The boys can play in the courtyard while we figure out the truth," she finished gently. An hour later, Diego and Lucas were happily engaged in a game of soccer in the small courtyard behind their building, their laughter drifting through the open windows like music. Javier had retrieved a leather portfolio from his car, expensive, well-worn, and obviously treasured. "I've carried this with me for 10 years, he said, setting it on her kitchen table with reverent care. "Every business trip, every meeting, every important moment of my life, because it contains the most important parts of who I am." Elena sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, preparing herself for whatever revelation would either heal or destroy what remained of her ability to trust. "The letters," he said, opening the portfolio to reveal hundreds of pieces of paper, some on expensive stationery, others on hotel letterhead, cocktail napkins, even coffee shop receipts. "I told you I wrote to you every day. These are proof." With trembling fingers, she picked up the letter on top, dated exactly 1 week after their wedding that never was. "My dearest Elena, today marks 1 week since I made the worst mistake of my life. I keep imagining what you're doing right now. Are you painting your nails that pretty pink color you love? Are you humming while you arrange flowers at the shop? Do you hate me as much as I hate myself? I saw you today from across the street, and you looked so beautiful but so sad. I wanted to run to you, to fall on my knees and beg forgiveness. but I know my presence would only bring you more pain. I love you more than my own breath. Forever yours, Javier." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She reached for another letter, this one dated 6 months later. "My beloved Elena, I dreamed about our children again last night, twin boys with your smile in my eyes, running through sunlit gardens, while you and I watched from a porch swing. When I woke up, the loneliness nearly killed me. I've been offered a partnership in Chicago. Maybe distance will help this constant ache in my chest. But even if I move to the moon, I'll still write to you every day because these letters are the only prayer I know. Yours in eternal love, Javier." "You dreamed about twins," she whispered, the coincidence hitting her like lightning. Almost every night for the first year, he confirmed, 2 boys who looked just like Diego and Lucas. I thought it was my mind torturing me with impossible futures. She continued reading, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously as she followed the trajectory of his pain through carefully written words letters from holidays he spent alone, from birthdays when he bought 2 presents for children who didn't exist, from Mother's Days when he grieved for the woman who should have been wearing his ring. "But these don't explain why you left," she said, though her voice was gentler now, less accusing. "They don't explain your father's threats." Javier's jaw tightened, and he reached for a manila envelope she hadn't noticed before. "These do." The photographs spilled across her table like evidence from a crime scene. Pictures of her mother leaving work, of Valeria walking to school, of her own apartment building, taken from various angles, professional surveillance photos that spoke of serious resources and serious threats. Underneath the photos were copies of documents, her mother's employment records, Valeria's scholarship information, even details about their family's immigration status from decades earlier. "He hired private investigators," Javier said, his voice thick with shame, "professional stalkers who documented every vulnerable moment of your family's life. And then he presented me with this." He handed her a letter in Eduardo Alvarez's distinctive handwriting. "Javier, since you seem determined to destroy our family's reputation with this unsuitable alliance, I've taken the liberty of researching your little girlfriend's family. As you can see, they are quite vulnerable to the right kind of pressure. Her mother's position at the textile factory can be eliminated with a single phone call. Her sister's scholarship can be revoked based on irregularities I can easily arrange, and their immigration documentation, while legal, can be made to appear questionable to the right authorities. Marry this girl, and I will systematically destroy every person she loves. Walk away, and they remain safe. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. Eduardo Alvarez." Elena stared at the letter until the words became meaningless shapes, her mind struggling to process the calculated cruelty it represented. This wasn't the heated anger of a disappointed father. This was the cold malice of a man who would destroy innocent people to maintain his own vision of propriety. "He would have done it," Javier said quietly. "You know, he would have. Your mother would have lost her job. Valeria would have lost her scholarship, and your family would have been systematically destroyed piece by piece until there was nothing left. So you chose to destroy me instead," she said. But there was no venom in the words now, only exhausted understanding. "I chose to save everyone you loved at the cost of everything I loved," he corrected. "I was 23 years old, terrified, and too stupid to realize there might have been other options." She sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the evidence of manipulation and threats that had shaped both their lives. Finally, she stood and walked to her bedroom, returning with a small wooden box that looked handmade and well-loved. "Your turn to see something," she said, setting the box between them. Inside were hundreds of pages covered in her neat handwriting, diary entries addressed to him, letters she had never sent, photographs of Diego and Lucas at every stage of their young lives. "I wrote to you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every single night for 10 years. I told you about their first steps, their first words, their first days of school. I shared every milestone you were missing, every moment when they needed their father." Javier picked up an entry dated from 2 years ago. "Dear Javier, Diego drew a picture of our family today. In it, there are 4 people. Me, him, Lucas, and a tall man with dark hair standing behind us with his hands on our shoulders. When I asked him who the man was, he said, 'That's our daddy. I know we've never met him, but I can feel him loving us from far away.' I cried for an hour after he went to bed. How do children know things that adults spend years trying to understand? Forever yours, Elena. His hands shook as he read, tears streaming down his face without shame or reservation. They felt me loving them, he said. Every day, she confirmed. They used to tell me stories about dreams where a man who looked like them would watch over them while they slept. Lucas was convinced you were a guardian angel who couldn't visit during the day. They sat surrounded by 10 years of love letter she's to her, hers to him, both of them pouring their hearts onto paper while living separate lives built on the foundation of a single devastating choice. We loved each other through every single day, Javier said with wonder, his voice filled with awe. Even apart, even believing it was hopeless, we never stopped loving each other. The boys, Elena said suddenly, remembering they had been playing outside for over an hour. But when she looked out the window, she saw them sitting on the courtyard steps, sharing a bag of chips Celeste must have given them, talking quietly, while keeping respectful distance from the apartment where important adult conversations were happening. They know, she realized. Somehow they know this is important. Javier gathered the letters and photographs, but his eyes never left her face. What happens now, Elena? Where do we go from here? She looked at the evidence spread across her table. Proof of threats and manipulation, but also proof of love that had endured impossible circumstances. She thought about her sons playing outside, about the way they had immediately trusted this man who shared their eyes, about the dreams they described of a father who loved them from afar. Now, she said, reaching across the table to take his hand, we figure out how to be a family, the real kind, not the kind built on secrets and fear. Are you sure? He asked, his voice thick with hope and terror. Are you sure you can forgive me? I'm sure that 10 years is long enough to punish both of us for your father's cruelty, she replied. I'm sure that our boys deserve to know their father. And I'm sure that some love stories are worth fighting for, even when they start with endings. Outside, Diego and Lucas's laughter echoed through the courtyard, and inside, two hearts began the careful process of healing wounds that had been bleeding for a decade. Chapter 8. When Worlds Collide. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning like a death sentence printed on legal letterhead, its cold words transforming Elena's tiny sanctuary into just another address she could no longer afford. She stood in her doorway, still wearing her bakery apron dusted with flour, reading the 30-day notice while her world crumbled around her. Mama, Diego called from the kitchen table where he and Lucas were eating breakfast before school. What's that paper? Nothing important, baby. She lied. Her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. Just grown-up mail. But it was everything important. 3 months behind on rent, because Mrs. Carter at the downtown office building had restructured and eliminated Elena's night cleaning position, which everyone knew was corporate speak for. We don't want the scandal of Javier Alvarez's baby mama working in our prestigious building. The whispers had started the moment. Word spread that Javier had returned to town and was spending time with Elena and her twin boys. At first, they were just curious murmurs in grocery stores and church pews. But when someone photographed them together at the park, Javier teaching Lucas to throw a perfect spiral while Diego sketched under a tree, the gossip transformed into something venomous. I heard she trapped him with those babies. Poor man probably doesn't even know they're his. She's just after his money now that he's successful. Some people never learn their place. Each whispered comment was a poison arrow aimed at her reputation, her character, her worth as a human being. And unfortunately, in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, reputation was currency she could no longer afford to lose. The call from Dawn Bakery came during her lunch break at Celeste's flower shop. Mrs. Thompson's voice apologetic but firm. Elena, honey, I'm sorry, but some of my regular customers have been complaining. They say it makes them uncomfortable buying bread from someone who's swell. You know how people talk. I can't afford to lose business right now. 10 years of waking at 4 o'clock a.m., of bleeding fingers and aching back, of perfect croissants and artisanal loaves, dismissed because she had dared to let love back into her life. Celeste Moreau, bless her French heart, had refused to fire Elena despite similar pressure from some of her wealthy clients. Let them buy their flowers somewhere else, she had declared with magnificent defiance. Beauty is beauty, and love is love. Anyone who cannot see that has no business in my shop. But even Celeste's loyalty couldn't cover 3 months of back rent, the boys' school expenses, the medical bills from Lucas's recent bout with strep throat, and the 1,000 daily necessities that poverty made into luxury items. Elena folded the eviction notice and slipped it into her purse, determined to shield her children from this latest crisis. They had already given up so much. She refused to let them see their mother as a failure, too. That evening, as she walked home from Celeste's shop, carrying day-old flowers that hadn't sold, she found Javier waiting on her building's front steps. He wore a charcoal business suit that cost more than she made in 6 months, but his face carried the same worried expression she remembered from their youth when he was concerned about her well-being. "We need to talk," he said, standing as she approached. "The boys are upstairs doing homework," she replied carefully. "They'll be expecting dinner soon." "I know about the eviction notice," he said, the words hitting her like a physical blow. She had told no one, had planned to handle this crisis the way she handled everything. Alone. Quietly. With the grim determination that had carried her through 10 years of single motherhood. "How?" she whispered. "Your landlord called me this afternoon. Apparently, word has gotten around that I'm involved with you and the boys. He wanted to know if I plan to take responsibility for your debts." The humiliation burned through her like acid. Even her landlord, Mr. Novak, who had known her for 5 years and never once received a late payment until these past few months, had gone behind her back to the man he assumed was her benefactor. "What did you tell him?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "I told him I would cover whatever you owed and take care of all future payments," Javier said, his voice gentle but determined. "I transferred enough money to cover 6 months' rent and all your outstanding bills." "You had no right," she shouted, the words erupting from her with volcanic fury, loud enough that a passing neighbor turned to stare. "You had no right to do that without asking me. Elena, you're about to be homeless. My sons are about to be homeless. I had every right. They are my sons," she said fiercely, stepping closer to him with all the righteous anger of a woman whose last shred of dignity was being systematically stripped away. "I have been their mother, their father, their provider, their protector for 10 years. I don't need you to swoop in with your checkbook and save us like we're some charity case." "That's not what this is," he said, his own voice rising with frustration. "This is me taking care of my family." "We are not your family," she shouted, and immediately regretted the words when she saw how they devastated him. "We were your family 10 years ago. Now we're just the complicated consequences of choices you made." They stood on the sidewalk, two people who loved each other desperately but couldn't bridge the gap that 10 years of separation had carved between them. Around them, the neighborhood continued its evening routine. Children playing, families preparing dinner, life moving forward while theirs seemed frozen in a moment of impossible pain. "I lost my job at the bakery," she said suddenly, the admission torn from her lips like a confession. "Mrs. Thompson fired me because customers were uncomfortable buying bread from someone connected to you, and the cleaning company let me go because building management complained about the distraction of my personal life." Javier's face went white with understanding. "This is my fault. The gossip, the judgment, it's because of me. It's because people in this town have nothing better to do than tear down anyone who dares to reach above their station," she corrected bitterly. "But yes, it's worse because of you. Because you're Javier Alvarez, and I'm just Elena from the wrong side of town with 2 illegitimate children." "Don't call them that," he said sharply. "Never call them that." "It's what people are calling them," she replied, exhaustion weighing down her voice. "It's what they'll always call them as long as we're together." The truth hung between them like a sword. Being with Javier meant subjecting her children to scrutiny, judgment, and the kind of social pressure that could follow them for the rest of their lives. But being without him meant financial ruin and the constant ache of incomplete love. "Let me help," he said quietly. "Please, Elena, let me take care of you the way I should have been doing all along." "I don't want your money," she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I want to be able to take care of my children myself." "Our children," he corrected, "and there's no shame in accepting help from someone who loves you." Before she could respond, the sky opened up with a sudden downpour that sent them running for the building's entrance. They stood in the small lobby, both soaked and breathing heavily, while rain pounded against the windows like nature demanding their attention. "I'm scared," she admitted suddenly, the words barely audible above the storm. "I'm scared that if I let you help, I'll lose the strength I fought so hard to build. And I'm scared that if I don't, my boys will pay the price for my pride." "And I'm scared," he replied, "that 10 years from now, I'll still be standing outside your life, watching from a distance while you struggle alone because I was too much of a coward to fight for us the first time." They stared at each other in the dim light of the lobby, two people drowning in their own stubbornness and fear while the storm raged around them. "The boys," Elena said suddenly, remembering they had been upstairs alone for over an hour. They climbed the stairs together, and when Elena opened her apartment door, she found Diego and Lucas exactly where she had left them, at the kitchen table, homework completed, dinner dishes washed and put away. They had heard the shouting from the street, had seen their mother's distress, and had quietly taken care of everything they could control. "Mama," Lucas said, concern evident in his young voice. "Are you okay?" She looked at her sons, these perfect, resilient children who had learned to be responsible beyond their years, who had never complained about their small apartment or second-hand clothes, or the way other kids sometimes whispered about their absent father. "I'm okay, baby," she said, kneeling to hug them both. "We're all going to be okay." Over their heads, she met Javier's eyes, and in that moment, she made a choice that terrified and liberated her simultaneously. "Stay for dinner," she said quietly. "We need to talk about what comes next." And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, asking for help wasn't the same as giving up her strength. Chapter 9. Passionate Redemption. The 15th of October arrived with the kind of golden autumn light that made everything look like a painting, but Elena awoke with the familiar ache that always accompanied this date. The anniversary of the wedding that never was, the day her fairy tale had died in white roses and broken promises. For 10 years, she had spent this day in quiet mourning, allowing herself exactly 24 hours to grieve what could have been before returning to the business of survival. But this year felt different. This year, Javier was part of their lives again, slowly weaving himself into their daily routine with such natural grace that sometimes she forgot he had ever been absent. He had kept his promise to help without taking over, paying their bills while respecting her need to maintain her independence and dignity. The boys had left for school with excitement buzzing around them like electricity. Diego, because his art teacher had selected his portrait of a soccer player for the school's gallery, and Lucas because his coach had recommended him for the advanced training program that Javier had quietly funded. Celeste had insisted Elena take the day off, claiming she needed to reorganize her inventory, but really understanding that some anniversaries required solitude. So Elena found herself alone in her tiny apartment, surrounded by memories and trying to decide whether today was for grieving the past or celebrating the uncertain future. The knock on her door came at exactly 2:00 p.m. Per the time their wedding ceremony should have begun a decade ago. "It's open," she called, expecting Celeste with leftover pastries or perhaps Mrs. Lynn with another casserole that was really an excuse to check on her well-being. Instead, Javier stepped through her doorway carrying an armload of white roses, not the expensive, perfect blooms from high-end florists, but simple, honest flowers that smelled like hope and second chances. "You remember," she said softly, accepting the roses with hands that trembled despite her best efforts to remain composed. "I remember everything," he replied, his voice thick with emotion, "every detail of the day I destroyed both our lives." She looked at him carefully, noting the formal way he was dressed, not in his usual business attire, but in a dark suit that looked suspiciously like the one he should have worn to their wedding. His hair was combed back, his tie perfectly knotted, and in his eyes was a mixture of nervousness and determination that took her breath away. "Javier, what are you doing?" she asked. "I'm trying to give us the wedding day we should have had," he said, setting down a small suitcase she hadn't noticed. "Obviously, I can't undo 10 years of pain, but I thought maybe we could create a new memory to replace the worst day of both our lives." From the suitcase, he pulled out items that made her heart stop. Battery. Powered string lights that he began hanging around her small living room, transforming the space into something magical. A portable speaker that filled the air with soft instrumental music, the same songs that had been planned for their original ceremony. Candles that he lit with reverent care, casting everything in a warm golden glow. The boys, She started to protest. "Are spending the evening with Celeste," he said, continuing his preparations. "She's teaching them to make authentic French pastries, and Lucas is convinced he's going to master croissants tonight." Elena watched in stunned silence as her humble apartment was transformed into a chapel of light and love, every detail carefully planned to honor what they had lost while celebrating what they might still have. From the suitcase, he produced one final item that made her gasp: her grandmother's wedding dress, professionally cleaned and restored to its original ivory beauty. "How do you have this?" she whispered, touching the familiar silk with reverent fingers. "Your mother," he admitted. "I called her last week and explained what I wanted to do. She said your grandmother would have wanted her dress to finally see the wedding it was meant for." Tears streamed down Elena's face as she held the dress that had symbolized so much hope, so much heartbreak, and now, impossibly, so much possibility. "Will you put it on?" Javier asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not because you have to, not because I deserve it, but because maybe we both deserve a chance to see what we would have looked like on our wedding day." 20 minutes later, Elena emerged from her bedroom wearing her grandmother's dress, and Javier's sharp intake of breath told her everything she needed to know. The dress still fit perfectly, the ivory silk glowing against her dark skin, the pearl buttons catching the candlelight like captured stars. "You're the most beautiful woman who has ever existed," he said, his voice rough with emotion. 10 years ago, a lifetime ago, right now you take my breath away." "This is crazy," she said, but she was smiling through her tears. "This is absolutely insane." "The best love always is," he replied, offering her his arm. "Shall we?" They moved together through her small apartment, as if they were walking down the aisle of the grandest cathedral, the soft music providing a soundtrack for dreams that had been deferred but never destroyed. When they reached the center of their makeshift chapel, Javier turned to face her, taking her hands in his with infinite tenderness. 10 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life," he began, his voice strong despite the tears in his eyes. "I let fear and other people's hatred steal our future. I let my father's poison convince me that protecting you meant destroying us both." "Javier, please let me finish," he said gently. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But I also know that some love stories are too powerful to end with "what if." I know that Diego and Lucas are proof that our love created something beautiful, even when we couldn't be together." He dropped to one knee in her small living room, pulling out a ring box that looked both new and vintage, clearly chosen with the same care he had put into every detail of this moment. "Elena, you are the love of my life, the mother of my children, the woman who taught me that real strength looks like raising 2 perfect boys alone while never losing your capacity for kindness. You are my heart, my soul, my everything." His voice broke, but he continued, "Will you marry me? Not because we're trying to recapture the past, but because we're brave enough to build a future together." The ring was perfect, not the large, ostentatious diamond his wealth could afford, but a simple, elegant solitaire that caught the candlelight and threw rainbows against the wall. It was a ring chosen for a woman who understood that true luxury was love, not expense. "Yes," she whispered, the word escaping her lips like a prayer. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook with emotion, then rose to cup her face in his palms, his thumbs wiping away her tears with infinite gentleness. "I love you," he said, his forehead resting against hers. "I have loved you every single day for 10 years. And I will love you for every day I have left on this earth." "I love you too," she replied, her voice thick with joy and wonder. "Even when I hated you, I loved you. Even when I tried to forget you, you lived in every beat of my heart." The kiss was inevitable, necessary, a reunion of souls that had been separated too long. It started gentle, tentative, like they were rediscovering each other after a long journey. But passion, denied for 10 years, could not be contained in careful touches. Javier's hands tangled in her hair, disturbing the careful style she had arranged, while her fingers clutched the lapels of his suit jacket, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. The kiss deepened, became desperate, hungry, filled with a decade of longing that threatened to consume them both. "Elena," he breathed against her lips. her name like a prayer on his tongue. "Don't talk," she whispered, her own voice breathless with need. "Just love me. Love me the way you should have been loving me all these years." They moved together to her bedroom, hands trembling as they helped each other out of formal clothes that had served their ceremonial purpose. The grandmother's dress was laid aside with reverent care, and then there was nothing between them but skin and starlight filtering through her small window. Their lovemaking was everything their younger selves had dreamed of, and more. Passionate, tender, desperate, and healing all at once. It was the wedding night they had been denied, the reunion they had both craved, the promise of forever finally fulfilled. Afterward, they lay entwined in her small bed, their bodies fitting together like puzzle pieces that had always belonged to each other. Javier traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, while Elena listened to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. "We're really doing this," she said softly, marveling at the ring that caught the moonlight on her finger. "We're really doing this," he confirmed, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Though I have to warn you, I'm going to want a real wedding too, with our boys standing beside us and your mother crying happy tears. And a honeymoon where I can spend 2 weeks, proving that 10 years apart just made me love you more." "A real wedding," she repeated, the words tasting like possibility and promise. "With white roses, with whatever flowers make you happiest," he said, his voice warm with love and laughter. "As long as you're walking toward me, nothing else matters." Outside their window, the world continued its ancient rhythm, but inside their small sanctuary, time seemed suspended in perfect happiness. They had found their way back to each other across 10 years of separation, through pain and misunderstanding and the kind of obstacles that destroyed weaker loves. But theirs wasn't a weak love. It was the kind that created beautiful children from broken hearts, that wrote letters to someone who couldn't read them, that survived abandonment and poverty and the cruelest kind of gossip. As sleep claimed them both, wrapped in each other's arms, Elena finally understood what her grandmother had meant when she'd said that real love stories never really end. They just pause sometimes, waiting for the right moment to continue. Chapter 10. Forever Blooms. 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning when the world seemed painted in watercolors of hope and new beginnings, Elena stood in the back room of Celeste's flower shop, surrounded by the women who had shaped her into the person she was meant to become. Her mother, Marisol, wept happy tears as she fastened the pearl necklace that had belonged to 4 generations of Torres women. Her sister, Valeria, now a registered nurse, thanks to a scholarship that had never been threatened, fussed with the hem of a new wedding, dress not her grandmother's this time, but something chosen specifically for this moment, this love, this future. Celeste Moreau, honorary grandmother to Diego and Lucas, flitted around arranging white roses in Elena's hair with the expertise of someone who understood that flowers were simply love, made visible. "Magnifique," Celeste declared in her musical French accent, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "You look like an angel who decided to grace us earthbound mortals with her presence." The dress was simple but breathtaking, ivory silk that flowed like water over her curves, with delicate lace sleeves that covered the scars on her hands and arms. Those marks of survival had become precious to her now, battle scars that told the story of a woman who had refused to surrender, who had fought for her children and her own worth, with nothing but determination and love. "I can't believe this is really happening," Elena whispered, touching the engagement ring that had lived on her finger for 6 months. Like a promise finally kept. "Believe it, baby girl," her mother said, voice thick with emotion. "That man out there has spent every day proving he's worthy of you, and those boys of yours have been planning this wedding like it's the most important event in human history." Through the shop's windows, Elena could see the courtyard behind the building, where Javier waited beneath an arch of white roses and trailing ivy. He wore a charcoal gray suit that made his emerald eyes look like precious stones, and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie for the 100th time. The guest list was massive but perfect. Celeste and her elderly husband, Pierre, Mrs. Lynn and her family, Father Antonio from St. Mary's, a handful of friends who had supported Elena through her darkest years, and Javier's business partners who had become genuine friends rather than social obligations. Eduardo Alvarez was notably absent, having been cut from his son's life with surgical precision after 10 years of toxic control. But the most important guests were already in position. Diego and Lucas, dressed in matching navy suits that made them look heartbreakingly grown up, stood ready to walk their mother down the aisle. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. These boys, products of broken promises, would be the ones to deliver their mother into the arms of forever love. "Mama," Diego said, appearing in the doorway with his artist's eye bright with wonder, "you look like a princess from one of those fairy tales, except better because you're real and you're our mama. And you're the most beautiful bride in the whole world," Lucas added with his characteristic protectiveness. "My sweet boys," Elena said, kneeling carefully to hug them without disturbing Celeste's floral artistry. "Are you ready to help me marry your father?" The word father still felt new on all their tongues, but it was getting easier every day. Javier had moved into the apartment below theirs, close enough to be part of their daily routine, but far enough to respect the gradual nature of their healing. He helped with homework, attended soccer games, and spent Sunday mornings teaching Diego advanced drawing techniques, while Lucas perfected his French toast recipe. "We've been ready for months," Lucas declared. "But Mama, there's something else we want to tell you." "What is it, baby?" Diego and Lucas exchanged one of their twin looks, the kind of silent communication that had always amazed her. Before Diego spoke, "We know Javier is our daddy. We figured it out weeks ago." Elena's breath caught. She and Javier had planned to have that conversation after the wedding, wanting to ensure their family was secure before adding the complexity of revelation. "How did you know?" she whispered. "The eyes were the first clue," Lucas said practically. And then Diego drew a picture of him, and it looked exactly like the daddy we used to dream about. Plus, Diego added with his innocent wisdom, "He loves us the way daddies are supposed to love their kids, and he looks at you the way Prince Eric looks at Ariel in the movie, like you're magic." Through her tears, Elena laughed at the Disney reference that somehow captured the essence of epic romance better than any poetry. "Are you happy about it?" she asked, needing to know their hearts were at peace with this truth. "We're happy we finally get to keep him," Lucas said simply. "We were scared he might leave again." "Never," Elena said fiercely. "We're a family now, forever and always." The music began, a string quartet that Celeste had somehow procured, playing the same melody that had filled Elena's apartment on the night of their engagement. It was time. Diego and Lucas each took one of her arms, standing tall with pride and responsibility as they prepared to escort their mother toward the future they all deserved. As they stepped into the courtyard, Elena saw their small congregation rise to their feet, saw Celeste dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, saw Father Antonio smiling with the joy of a man who believed deeply in the power of love to heal all wounds. But mostly, she saw Javier. He stood beneath the flower arch, looking like he was seeing a miracle unfold, his green eyes bright with unshed tears, and a love so profound it took her breath away. When their eyes met across the small space, he pressed his hand to his heart and mouthed, "Beautiful." Diego and Lucas walked their mother down the aisle of rose petals with the solemnity of young men who understood they were participating in something sacred. When they reached the altar, Javier knelt to their eye level. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking care of her until I could come home." "Thank you," Lucas replied with equal seriousness, "for coming back." "Thank you for being our daddy," Diego added, and threw his arms around Javier's neck with the uninhibited affection that only children could offer. The ceremony was perfect in its simplicity. Father Antonio spoke of love that endures all trials, of families that bloom in their own time, of second chances that prove God believes in happy endings. Their vows were personal, honest, and filled with promises that acknowledged both their painful past and their hopeful future. "Elena," Javier said, his voice strong and sure, 10 years ago, I was too young and too frightened to fight for our love. Today, I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that some mistakes can become miracles if we're brave enough to try again." "Javier," she replied, her voice clear as crystal, "you gave me the greatest gifts of my life in Diego and Lucas, even when you couldn't stay to help me raise them. Today, I choose to trust in the love that created them, the love that survived separation, the love that brought us all home to each other." When Father Antonio pronounced them husband and wife, Javier's kiss was gentle, reverent, and filled with the promise of forever. Diego and Lucas cheered, Celeste sobbed dramatically, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring as if the whole world was celebrating their triumph. During the reception in Celeste's shop, surrounded by flowers and fairy lights, and the laughter of people who genuinely cared about their happiness, Elena pulled Javier aside for a private moment. "I have something to tell you," she said, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "What is it, Mrs. Alvarez?" he asked, and the name made her smile with pure joy. "We're going to have another baby," she whispered, watching his face transform with wonder and delight. For a moment, he was speechless, his hands moving to cover hers on her abdomen. "Really? Really? I found out this morning. I wanted to wait until we were officially married to share the news." Javier lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while she laughed with pure happiness. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with tears. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the reality of the words. "Our baby. Our baby," she confirmed, "who will grow up knowing both parents in a house filled with love and laughter and the certain knowledge that they are wanted." As if summoned by the mention of family, Diego and Lucas appeared at their sides, still buzzing with the excitement of the day. "What are you two whispering about?" Lucas asked with 10-year-old suspicion. Elena and Javier exchanged a look. Then Elena knelt to the boy's level. "How would you feel about being big brothers?" The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before both boys erupted in excitement, their questions tumbling over each other. "Really? When? Is it a boy or a girl? Can we help pick the name?" As evening fell, and their small wedding party moved inside Celeste's shop for dancing and cake, Elena found herself standing in the doorway, watching her new husband teach their sons a complicated dance step while Celeste clapped in time to the music. Her hand rested on her stomach, where their new baby was growing, while her heart overflowed with gratitude for the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. 10 years ago, she had stood in a church wearing her grandmother's dress, believing her love story was ending before it had properly begun. Now she understood that some love stories are too powerful for traditional timelines. Some families are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in, even when hope seems impossible. As Javier spun Diego while Lucas attempted to dip Celeste with hilarious results, Elena pressed her hand to her heart and whispered a prayer of thanksgiving for second chances, for love that refuses to die, and for the beautiful truth that sometimes the best happily ever afters begin with the courage to try again. The white roses surrounding them seemed to glow in the candlelight, and for just a moment, Elena could swear she felt her grandmother's spirit smiling down on the wedding that dress was always meant to see. Forever had finally begun.